Hello world, what is going on? I am Ray, your favorite camera technician at Centennial College, and whether you're a photographer or a cinematographer, lenses are very key when it comes to your image's quality as well as production value. So today I'm actually going to talk about the difference between zoom lenses and primes. Actually, this isn't really a zoom lens, it's actually a coffee mug. Earl Grey. Okay, so let's briefly go over what the purpose of a lens is. So a lens is kind of like the human eye, where its main function is to take in light, and it's up to the camera sensor or your brain to interpret what those light signals mean, and that's how we get images. For the record, the human eye is equivalent to 50 millimeters on a full-frame sensor. If you're using something like APS-C, it's going to be closer to 35 millimeters, and on a Micro Four Thirds sensor, it's actually 25 millimeters. So kind of like the human eye, prime lenses do not zoom in and out. In order to change your perspective, you have to move around physically. Zoom lenses, on the other hand, give you the ability to zoom in and out, so you can actually change your focal length without changing the lens itself. And here's going to be a few positives and negatives for both primes and zoom lenses. Let's start with primes. So the first thing that I want to talk about with prime lenses is the weight. Primes are typically lighter because they don't need as much glass and there's not as many moving parts. So it's actually easier to walk around with a bunch of primes compared to a couple of zooms. The other thing I want to talk about is the aperture. So typically speaking, zooms don't actually have the biggest apertures that you can find around. You can definitely find faster zooms, but typically they cap out at about f2.8. Whereas primes, you can find them at f1.8, 1.4, 1.2, and sometimes even 0.95. That is a lot more light you're laying into your sensor, so it's easier to do a lot of low light shooting. And you also get a lot more bokeh, which is the word that we usually use to describe the out of focus parts of your photo. So because there's not as many moving parts or as much glass in a prime lens, they typically come cheaper than a zoom lens. So if you're actually working on a budget and you can only get a couple lenses, then yeah, primes are definitely a good option for you. Now let's talk about zooms. So the biggest thing that I love about zooms is it gives you the flexibility of focal length. So yeah, as much as I love fast apertures on primes, the ability to punch into a shot is more important to me if I'm working on something like a wedding and I can't afford to miss the shot, because it takes forever to switch out a prime to get the proper focal length if I am indeed trying to get from a medium shot to like a close-up. The other thing I want to talk about is the value of the lens. So typically speaking, yeah, zoom lenses are a lot more expensive than primes, but that's as a 1-to-1 ratio. It's a lot cheaper to get one really good zoom than to get 3 primes that would have to cover the entire zoom length of this one lens. And the other thing that I really love about zooms is that they give you a really good creative way of using lens compression. So there's a weird physics thing where basically the farther away something is, the closer everything is perspectively speaking. So when you zoom in on a lens, you can actually crop out a lot of the background because everything gets so compressed that you don't see it anymore. And now my final thoughts. So I have an entire kit of zooms and prime lenses, and the main thing that actually makes me determine whether I'm using a zoom or a prime lens is what I am shooting. If I'm doing something with like models or actors and I have time to set up and change things around and redo shots, I will definitely use primes because I like the flexibility of having a wider aperture, and they tend to have like a very specific type of look to them. If I'm working on like wildlife, nature, or event photography, then I'm definitely going to be using a zoom. It's not super easy to tell people to redo certain things over and over again, especially at something like a wedding, right? Where you can't always get the bride to put on the ring 5 times to get different angles. So it's a lot more beneficial to have the flexibility of a zoom. That way you don't miss a shot, because unfortunately it takes time to switch out lenses. And that time is going to be the difference between getting the shot and not getting the shot. And here's some buying tips for you. So typically speaking, I like to recommend that everyone gets a 24-70 f2.8 lens. Mid-range zooms are typically the most versatile zooms that you can get because it can go wide at 24 and relatively telephoto at 70. But you can also be at the middle of 50 and just get the good balance of the two. I also like to recommend one really good prime lens. So this is the Rokinon 50mm f1.5. It is a cine lens, and I do love this lens because I love how wide it can get and how much bokeh I can get out of the lens. The Canon line also has a 50mm f1.8 that's pretty cheap, and it's called the Fantastic Plastic or the Nifty 50. And there you have it. That's my basic rundown of zooms versus primes. Do you have a preference on what kind of lenses you like to use? And what kind of photography do you like to do? Or videography? Let us know in the comment section down below. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see more of your favorite technician. I am Ray, stay safe, stay sane, and stay creative.